Wiltshire, January 1816. On the morning she found the ring, the Duchess of Ashvine did not raise her voice, did not ask a question, did not allow her hand to tremble as she carried it down the east corridor and set it beside a cup of coffee that was still sending a thin line of steam into the January air. But that morning was still weeks away, and before it arrived, there was the matter of how she came to be a duchess at all, which was a story that began, as these stories so often do, with someone else's confidence that they knew what was best. Lady Cressingham had proposed the match. This meant it had been proposed with the measured authority of a woman who had spent 31 years observing the failures of other people's romantic instincts and had concluded that affection was a secondary consideration in a well-constructed marriage, to be developed at leisure after the practical architecture was sound. She had buried 2 husbands, both of whom she had selected with care, and both of whom had, by her private accounting, performed satisfactorily. She was not sentimental. She was effective, and she had determined that Leander Ashworth, the 6th Duke of Ashvine, required a wife before the estate required a funeral. The Duke's situation was known in the county with the precision that Wiltshire brought to the business of knowing things. His first wife, Venetia, had died in the autumn of 1814, 14 months before Lady Cressingham set her attention on the problem. The marriage had been, by all credible accounts, extraordinary, and then terrible, in the particular way that only extraordinary marriages can become. Venetia had been brilliant, beautiful, ungovernable, and ultimately unreachable, and whatever had broken between them in the final year was a matter the Duke had sealed with the thoroughness of a man bricking up a doorway. He did not speak of her, the household did not speak of her. Ashvine Hall continued to operate around the shape of her absence, the way a river moves around a stone it cannot dissolve. Damaris Corfield arrived at Ashvine Hall on a Thursday in the 2nd week of January, accompanied by her father and the composed energy of a woman who had spent the carriage ride from the inn reading the county surveyor's report on the Ashvine estate, because she believed in understanding the dimensions of a situation before she entered it. She was 24. She was the only child of Matthias Corfield, who had built the largest textile concern in Lancashire through the methodical application of intelligence and capital, and who had raised his daughter with the working assumption that she would need both. She wore dark gray, well-tailored, the kind of dress that communicated means without apology and taste without performance. And she walked into the entrance hall of Ashvine with the posture of a woman who had been inside large houses before and was not going to pretend otherwise. The Duke appeared in the drawing room at 11:15. He was leaner than she had expected from the portrait Lady Cressingham had described, and there was a quality to his attention that she registered immediately, a precision that was not quite coldness, but was certainly not warmth. It was the attention of a man who had organized himself around a principle and was conducting his life accordingly. Lady Cressingham and her father arranged themselves near the window with the practiced subtlety of chaperones who believed their presence was merely technical. The Duke looked at this arrangement and then at Damaris with an expression she would later describe to her father as that of a man conducting an inventory of a room he had already decided to furnish. "Miss Corfield," he said, "I prefer to speak directly." "I have no objection to directness," she said. "I'm looking for a wife," he said. "My requirements are specific. I need someone of sufficient means to contribute to the restoration of certain estate matters that have been deferred. I need someone of practical temperament who is capable of managing a household of this scope without requiring," he paused, and in the pause she heard the entire history, "without requiring the kind of attention that distracts from the function of the arrangement." He looked at her with the steady gaze of a man who believed he was being transparent. "I need a wife," he said, who understands that a marriage is maintained, not felt. Damaris looked at him across the drawing room. She looked at the set of his hands, one resting on the arm of the chair, with a stillness that was not relaxation, but discipline. She looked at the quality of the light in the room and the empty space on the mantelpiece where something had been removed and not replaced, and she understood, with the clarity she brought to all significant calculations, that the blank space in his sentence was a woman's name, and the principle he had just articulated was a wound he addressed in the language of reason. She was quiet for precisely long enough to make the silence deliberate. "Your first wife," she said. Something shifted behind his expression, not a flinch, a recalibration. "Lady Cressingham mentioned the general circumstances," she said, "but you have just told me the specific ones, whether you intended to or not." He said nothing. "You are not looking for a wife who will maintain a marriage," she said. "You are looking for a wife who will not break you a second time, and you have decided that the way to ensure that is to remove feeling from the equation entirely." She held his gaze. "That is not directness, Your Grace. That is architecture." The room was very quiet. Lady Cressingham at the window had the expression of a woman whose plan had just departed from the itinerary in a direction she had not anticipated and was not entirely certain she disapproved of. "I accept your terms," Damaris said. The Duke looked at her. "I accept them," she said, "with the full understanding of why you have set them, which you have just explained to me more clearly than I suspect you explained to yourself. I will marry you. I will manage your household. I will contribute my father's resources to the restoration of the estate. And I will do all of it, knowing that you believe you are hiring a function, not choosing a person." She stood. She smoothed the front of her dress with the unhurried precision of a woman who had concluded her assessment. "I have one condition," she said. "I will not pretend I do not see what I see. You may build whatever walls you require. I will not knock on them, but I will not pretend they are not there." She looked at him one final moment. "Lady Cressingham has my father's address for the arrangements. Good morning, Your Grace." She collected her father from the window. They were in the carriage before Lady Cressingham had entirely registered that an acceptance had occurred, which felt, in every practical respect, like a departure. Her father, who had spent 24 years paying close attention to this particular person, waited until they were through the Ashvine gates. "Well," he said. "He needs a fortune and a function," she said. "He does not yet know he also needs a person. But he will." Her father looked at her with the expression of a man who recognized the quality of certainty his daughter had just applied to a human being, because it was the same quality she brought to a manufacturing problem, and it had never once failed to produce results. "You did not accept because it was practical," he said. She looked out the window at the Wiltshire countryside moving past them in the pale January light. "I accepted because he told me the truth about himself, while believing he was telling me something else entirely," she said. "A man who does that is not closed. He is only locked, and he has just shown me where the key is." Her father said nothing further. She looked at the road ahead and thought about a man in a drawing room who had asked for a function and received, without knowing it, a woman who had decided to take him apart and put him back together, at her own pace, on her own terms, with the full force of her father's money and her mother's patience, and the precise, unshakable conviction that she was right about what she had seen in him. She almost believed it was entirely a practical decision. They were married in February, which was fast, even by Lady Cressingham's standards, because Lady Cressingham had recognized in Damaris Corfield a woman whose decisions, once made, did not benefit from prolonged reflection, and because the Duke had no reason to delay what he considered a resolved matter. The wedding was held at the chapel on the Ashvaughan grounds, attended by the county, observed by the household, and conducted with the precise, unsentimental efficiencies of two people entering a contract they understood from entirely different angles. Damaris moved into Ashvane Hall on a Monday in the third week of February, with 4 trunks of clothes, a writing case that had been her mother's, and the focused attention of a woman taking possession. The household received her with the cautious deference reserved for a new authority whose temperament had not yet been tested, and she received the household with the measured warmth of a woman who understood that trust in a large house was earned by consistency, not by introduction. The Duke was courteous. This was the word she would have used if someone had asked, and it would have been accurate, and it would have been entirely insufficient. He was courteous the way a well-maintained clock is punctual, without effort and without warmth, a function of mechanism rather than intention. He appeared at meals. He inquired about her comfort. He provided her with an accounting of the household staff, the estate calendar, and the weekly schedule with the thoroughness of a man transferring operational knowledge to a competent deputy. He did not linger after dinner. He did not seek her company when company was not required. He did not, she noticed, with the attention she was learning to direct at everything in this house, use her name. She was your Grace. She was the Duchess. She was, in the household's careful parlance, her ladyship. She was never Damaris. She learned the house. She walked every room in the first week with the housekeeper, Mrs. Pembury, who had been at Ashvine for 19 years, and who provided information with the strategic selectivity of a woman who understood that some rooms had histories and some histories had rooms, and that a new Duchess did not need all of it at once. Damaris noted the rooms that were well maintained and the rooms that were merely maintained. She noted the West Wing, which was closed, and the particular quality of silence Mrs. Pembury brought to any question that approached it. She noted the study on the ground floor where the Duke worked, and the fact that the door was always shut, and the fact that the household moved past it the way water moves past a stone. She noted all of it. She said nothing about any of it. She had promised she would not knock on walls. She had not promised she would not learn where every wall was. It was Dorcas who found the ring. Dorcas, who had come with Damaris from Lancashire as her lady's maid, who was 20 and sharp and had the quality of attention that came from growing up in a house where noticing things before they were said was the difference between a good position and no position at all. She found it on a Tuesday morning in the third week of March, in the inner pocket of a coat the Duke had sent down for brushing. A gold band, slender, worn smooth at the inside curve from years of contact with skin, engraved on the interior surface with a date and 2 initials that Damaris did not need to examine closely to understand. Dorcas brought it to her in the morning room with the expression of a woman who understood what she was holding and was waiting to be told what to do with it. Damaris looked at the ring in her maid's palm. She picked it up between her thumb and forefinger and held it to the morning light and read the engraving, which said what she already knew it would say. She was quiet for a moment. The house moved around her in its morning rhythms, the sound of the kitchen below, the steward's voice in the corridor, the particular quality of a Tuesday at Ashvane Hall that she had learned in 4 weeks of Tuesdays. "Thank you, Dorcas," she said. "That will be all." Dorcas left. Damaris stood in the morning room with the ring in her hand and thought about a man who had told her that a marriage was maintained, not felt, and who carried his late wife's wedding ring in the pocket of his coat, against his body, every day, like a man who had never stopped feeling anything. She did not go to him. She did not place the ring on his desk with a note. She did not leave it on the mantelpiece of the drawing room or return it to the pocket where it had lived. She went to the breakfast room, where the Duke's morning coffee was laid at his place, black, no sugar. The cup turned with the handle at 2 o'clock, the way he preferred it, because she had learned in 4 weeks exactly how he preferred everything, and placed the ring beside the cup on the saucer's edge, precisely positioned, catching the light from the east window. Then she sat at her own place and opened the morning's correspondence. He came in 7 minutes later. She did not look up. She heard the pause, the specific quality of a footstep that stops and doesn't immediately resume, and she knew, without looking, that he had seen it. The pause lasted 4 seconds. She counted. He sat down. He picked up the ring. He put it somewhere she did not see because she was not looking, and she did not look because looking would have been a question, and she had promised herself she would not ask questions he was not ready to answer. "Good morning," he said. His voice was exactly as it had been every morning for 4 weeks, controlled and courteous, and telling her nothing, except that this morning it was telling her everything, because the control was fractionally more precise than usual, and she had been paying close enough attention to hear the difference. "Good morning," she said. The coffee was drunk. The morning continued. Neither of them mentioned it. Not that day. Not that week. Not in any of the weeks that followed. But something had changed in the architecture of the house. Something structural. A wall that had not been knocked on, but had been acknowledged, openly and without flinch. And that was a different thing from pretending it was not there. She began her inventory of the estate accounts the following morning. The accounts were worse than she had expected, which was notable, because she had expected them to be bad. She had spent 4 weeks observing the household with the attention her father had trained into her since she was 14. The attention that read a ledger the way other people read faces, looking for what the numbers said when they thought no one was checking. The Ashvine books had the particular quality of records that had been kept faithfully and managed poorly. Every figure accurate, and every decision behind the figures wrong by a degree just small enough to seem reasonable, compounding over months into a problem that was no longer reasonable at all. The estate generated substantial income. The land was productive, the tenant farms well-positioned, the timber rights valuable. But the expenditure had been running ahead of the revenue for 3 years, since the autumn of 1813, and the steward, Mr. Oldham, had addressed the gap with the strategy of a man who believed the problem would resolve itself if he maintained the appearance of order. He had deferred repairs, extended credit to tenants who could not repay it, and allowed 2 profitable leases to lapse because renegotiation would have required decisions, and decisions would have required the Duke's attention. And the Duke's attention since the autumn of 1813 had been directed inward with a completeness that left very little for 17,000 acres. Damaris discovered the full scale on a Wednesday morning in the first week of April, when she requested the complete ledger set from the estate office and sat in the library, which she had claimed as her working space, without asking permission and without receiving objection, and read every entry from January 1813 to the present day. It took her 6 hours. When she was finished, she had a list of 11 items that required immediate action, 4 that required action within the month, and 1 that required a conversation with the Duke that she was not looking forward to. She started with the 11. The tenant cottages on the north boundary had been promised repairs in the previous spring that had not been carried out. She wrote to the carpenter, obtained an estimate, approved the work, and informed Mr. Oldham that the cost would come from the maintenance fund. Mr. Oldham received this instruction with the expression of a man who had just discovered that the new Duchess understood the maintenance fund better than he did. The expired leases she addressed by meeting the tenants herself at the estate office on a Friday morning with the composed authority of a woman who had been present at her father's negotiations since she was 18. Both tenants renewed. The terms were fair. She had learned from her father that fair terms produced reliable tenants, and reliable tenants produced stable income, and stable income was the material from which every other ambition was constructed. She did not consult the Duke about any of this. She had been given the household. She had taken the estate as well, because it needed taking, and because she had married a man who had asked for a function, and she had decided to be one that exceeded his specifications. The conversation she was not looking forward to arrived in the second week of April, when the drainage in the South Meadow failed after 3 days of spring rain, and the flooding threatened the access road to the home farm, which was the single most productive holding on the estate, and which required passage for the planting carts that were already 2 weeks behind schedule. She went to the Duke's study. She knocked, which was the first time she had knocked on that particular door, and which she noted, with the private humor she was developing about this marriage, was the first wall in the house she had actually knocked on, rather than simply learned the location of. "Come in," he said. She entered with the drainage survey under her arm, and the estate ledger in her hand, and the focused energy of a woman bringing a problem and its solution simultaneously, because she had learned from her father that no one wanted to hear about a fire without also hearing where the water was. "The South Meadow drainage has failed," she said. "The channel was last maintained in 1812 and has silted beyond function. The flooding will reach the home farm road by tomorrow if the rain continues, and the planting schedule is already behind." She laid the survey on his desk. "I have obtained an estimate from Keeling, the county surveyor. The work requires 3 weeks and access through the Ashvane Wood, which will need temporary clearance of the timber path." He looked at the survey. He looked at the estimate. He looked at her with an expression she had not catalogued before, the assessing attention that she had come to expect, but underneath it, something less controlled. The recognition of a person doing something he had not asked for and had not expected and could not dismiss. "You have spoken to Keeling," he said. "This morning." "And the tenants?" "Informed. The Holwell farm will need temporary access through the east gate for their carts during the work. I have arranged it with Mr. Oldham." He looked at her for a moment that extended past the professional register. "You have arranged a great deal," he said. "The estate required it," she said. "The estate," he said, and there was something in the repetition, the faintest pressure on the word, that told her he knew the estate was not the only thing she was managing, and that he was not entirely certain whether to be grateful or unsettled, and that the uncertainty itself was new to him. He looked at the drainage survey again. He traced the line of the proposed channel with his finger, the way a man reads a document he is taking seriously. "The clearance through the wood," he said, "will affect the riding path. For 3 weeks. I ride that path daily." "I know," she said. "The alternative is a longer route through the north gate. The footing is sound." He looked at her. She met his gaze and held it without challenge and without concession. "Proceed," he said. "Speak to Oldham about the timber path. I will inform the head groom about the riding route." "Thank you," she said. She collected the survey and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "Your Grace," she said. He looked up. "The accounts for the last 3 years. I have been reviewing them." Something shifted in his expression. Not alarm. Something closer to the expression he had worn at the breakfast table on the morning of the ring. The expression of a man who is being seen in a place he believed was private. "The estate is solvent," she said carefully. "But it has been managed with deference where it required decision. Mr. Oldham is loyal and accurate. He is not strategic. The gap between those qualities has cost the estate approximately £1,400 over 3 years. She paused. She let the number do what numbers did, which was to sit in a room and be true. "I have a proposal for restructuring the accounts," she said. "I would like to present it to you when the drainage matter is settled. There is no urgency beyond the general observation that money deferred is money lost." He was quiet for a moment. The study was very still around them, the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece, the sound of rain against the window, the particular quality of a room in which a man had been sitting alone with his paperwork and his silence for a very long time. "You have been here 8 weeks, he said. "Yes." "In 8 weeks, you have renegotiated 2 leases, commissioned repairs on 4 tenant cottages, engaged a county surveyor, and conducted a 3-year audit of the estate finances." "The estate required it," she said again. He looked at her with the expression that was moving, incrementally, and against what she suspected was his preference, away from the assessing one, and towards something she was going to have to think about later. "Present the proposal on Monday," he said. "I will clear the morning." "Thank you, Your Grace." She left the study and closed the door behind her, and stood in the corridor for a moment in the sound of the rain, and thought about the expression that had arrived when she said the word strategic, the one underneath the assessment, the one that had looked at her as though he was seeing someone he had not hired. She thought, "He is beginning to see me." She thought, "I promised I would not knock, but I did not promise I would not be visible." She went back to the library, and the rain continued, and the south meadow flooded precisely as she had predicted, and the work began the following morning, and she stood in the mud in her second-best boots, directing the surveyor's crew with the calm authority of a woman who had seen worse weather in Lancashire. The Duke rerouted to the north gate on his morning ride, passed the south meadow at 8:30, and saw her there, in the rain, managing his estate with the energy of a person who had not been asked and didn't intend to stop. He watched for longer than the riding path required. Then he turned the horse north and said nothing to anyone about what he had seen, and she did not know he had been there. And the morning continued on both sides of the Ashvane Wood with the quality of 2 people beginning to understand each other from a distance they had both agreed not to close. The county began to arrive in April. This was how Wiltshire operated in spring, not with formal invitations, but with the gradual, inevitable resumption of social contact that followed the thaw, as though the families of the county had been held in suspension by winter and were now released by temperature into each other's drawing rooms, with the reliable momentum of people who had been doing this for generations and saw no reason to alter the pattern. Damaris was received with interest. This was distinct from warmth, though warmth was occasionally included. She was the new Duchess of Ashvine, which commanded a certain respect regardless of origin. She was also the daughter of a Lancashire manufacturer, which commanded a certain scrutiny for exactly the same reason. Wiltshire was not Kent. It was not London. It was a county that made its assessments slowly and revised them rarely, and the assessment of Damaris Corfield, now Ashworth, was a project the county intended to take its time with. She did not rush them. She had learned in her father's world that the surest way to be accepted was to be consistent, and the surest way to be dismissed was to perform. And the difference between the two was the difference between a woman who arrived at a dinner and talked about drainage and a woman who arrived at a dinner and talked about herself. She talked about drainage. She talked about the spring planting and the county road commission and the tenant improvement scheme she was developing at Ashvine, and she talked about all of it with the precise, unperformative knowledge of a woman who had actually walked the fields in question and could name the soil composition of the South Meadow from memory. Lady Hathwick noticed first. Lady Hathwick was the Duke's godmother, 71, a widow of 14 years, who had outlived 2 husbands and 1 era of county society, and was currently presiding over the next, with the serene authority of a woman who had decided long ago that observation was more interesting than participation. She had known Leander since he was born. She had known Venetia. She had watched the marriage, and the unraveling, and the afterward, with the specific attention of a woman who loved the boy and was powerless to reach the man, and had been waiting, with the patience of someone who understood that some doors could only be opened from the inside, for something to change. She found Damaris at the Ashvane Spring Dinner, which was the first formal occasion Damaris had hosted, in conversation with Sir Gerald Matcham about the county water table, which Sir Gerald knew a great deal about, and was delighted to discuss with someone who actually understood the subject. "You have made a conquest of Sir Gerald," Lady Hathwick said when the conversation concluded, and Sir Gerald had moved on to the next person who would tolerate his enthusiasm. "Sir Gerald is extremely knowledgeable," Damaris said. "Sir Gerald is extremely tedious to everyone in this county, except you and possibly his wife. And his wife has the advantage of selective deafness." Lady Hathwick looked across the room to where the Duke was managing the far end of the dinner table with the practiced precision she had watched him develop since he was 22. "He has been watching you. Sir Gerald, my godson." Damaris followed Lady Hathwick's gaze. The Duke was in conversation with 2 county men about the road commission. He was not looking at her. He was managing his table with the discipline of a man who had been performing this particular function for years, but Damaris had spent 2 months learning the difference between where his attention appeared to be and where it actually was, and she did not need Lady Hathwick to tell her what she had already catalogued. "We have a productive working arrangement," Damaris said. "I am sure you do," Lady Hathwick said, with the tone of a woman who had heard the word productive used as a shield before and was not deceived by it. Venetia never spoke to Sir Gerald about anything. She found the county unbearable. She told me once that Wiltshire was a place where interesting people came to become dull. She paused. "You are not finding the county dull." "I'm finding the county extremely well drained and in need of better lease terms," Damaris said. Lady Hathwick looked at her for a long moment, with the assessing warmth of a woman who was making a decision about someone and was arriving at a favorable conclusion. "You are good for this house," she said. "Whether you are good for him remains to be seen. But the house is a start." She moved on to the next conversation with the efficiency of a woman who distributed her attention like a limited resource, and Damaris stood with her wineglass and watched the Duke manage his dinner and thought about the phrase "whether you are good for him," and about the fact that Lady Hathwick had separated the house from the man, as though they were 2 different projects requiring 2 different assessments, and about the possibility that they were. The accounts meeting happened on a Monday morning in the 3rd week of April, in the library, which was her territory, and which the Duke entered with the quality of a man stepping into a space he recognized as belonging to someone else. She had laid the restructuring proposal on the desk with the supporting ledgers open to the relevant pages, because she believed in making the evidence visible rather than narrating it, and because she had learned from her father that the strongest argument was the one that required the least explanation. He read the proposal standing. He read it completely, every page, every figure, with the focused attention she had come to expect from him, and which she had stopped pretending was not one of the things she respected about him. He asked 4 questions. Each one was precise. Each one confirmed he understood what she was proposing. The 4th question confirmed he understood what she wasn't saying, which was that the estate had been drifting for 3 years because he had been drifting for 3 years, and that the numbers on the page were a portrait of his absence rendered in pounds and shillings. He did not say this. She did not say this. The numbers said it, and they both read the numbers, and the room was quiet for a moment, in the way that rooms become quiet when something true has been acknowledged without being spoken. "Implement it," he said. "All of it. You have full authority over the accounts." "Thank you." He should have left. The meeting was concluded. The decision was made. There was nothing further that required his presence in a room that smelled of paper and ink and morning light. He did not leave. He sat down in the chair across from her desk, which was the first time he had sat in that chair, and she noted this with the attention she brought to everything in this house. and set it beside the other things she had noted. The 4-second pause at the breakfast table, the expression in the study when she had said strategic, the way his questions about the drainage had carried a quality of attention that went beyond professional interest. "The South Meadow," he said. "The drainage. It is holding. It is holding well. Keeling's work was sound. You were in the field," he said, "during the work, directing it. The surveyor required oversight. The ground conditions were worse than the initial assessment." He looked at her. She looked at him. The library was very quiet. "My father built his first mill when he was 26, she said, and she was not entirely certain why she was telling him this, except that the morning had the quality of a door that was slightly more open than usual, and she had promised herself she would not knock, but had not promised she would not speak when the door was open. He had 7 workers, and a building that leaked when it rained. He stood in the mill every morning at 5 o'clock for 7 years, until it didn't leak anymore. He told me once that the difference between an owner and an investor is that an owner stands in the rain." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you are?" he said. "An owner." "I am your wife," she said, and the word landed in the room with the weight of something that had not been said in this house, in the way she meant it, which was not as a title or a function, but as a fact that included the person attached to it. "Your wife, who stands in the rain." He looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the desk between them, covered in ledgers and proposals, and the evidence of 3 months of a woman rebuilding his estate, while he sat in his study with his silence and his dead wife's ring in his coat pocket, and the organized certainty that he had arranged his life correctly. "Damaris," he said. "Her name. The first time. Not your Grace. Not the Duchess. Her name, said in the library on a Monday morning, with the accounts between them, and the spring light coming through the tall windows, and the specific, unrepeatable quality of a word being used for the first time by a voice that had been avoiding it. Leander, she said back, because she wasn't a woman who received a thing without returning it, and because his name in her mouth felt like a key turning, and because the door had opened a fraction further, and she was not going to pretend it had not. He stood. He looked at her with the expression that had been building since the morning of the ring, the one that lived underneath the assessment and was no longer entirely contained by it. Monday mornings, he said. The accounts review. I would like to continue it. Weekly. The accounts do not require weekly review, she said. No, he said. They do not. He left the library. She sat at the desk with the ledgers and the sound of his footstep receding down the corridor, and thought about her name in his voice, and his name in hers, and a man who had just asked for weekly meetings he did not need, and had trusted her with the knowing. She thought, the door is not locked anymore. It is only closed, and closed is not locked, and the difference between them is everything. May in Wiltshire arrived with the determined warmth of a county shaking off the last of its reluctance, and the social calendar filled with the particular energy of families who had spent the winter evaluating the new Duchess of Ashvane from a distance, and were now prepared to evaluate her at closer range. The spring assembly at Stoneford House was the occasion, 44 people, the full county, hosted by Sir Gerald and Lady Matcham, with the generous efficiency of people who believed hospitality was a civic function and performed it accordingly. Damaris arrived with Lady Hathwick, who had developed the practice of collecting her for public occasions without formal arrangement, which was Lady Hathwick's method of communicating alliance without the inconvenience of stating it. The Duke was already present, in conversation near the south windows, with 2 landowners she recognized from the road commission meeting, and he looked up when she entered with the attention that was no longer the assessing kind, and had not been for some weeks, though neither of them had named what it had become. The evening moved in the patterns she had learned over weeks of Wiltshire gatherings, the circulation, the overlapping conversations, the social choreography of 44 people managing their reputations in a room designed for the purpose. She talked with Lady Matcham about the summer planting. She talked with the vicar's wife about the parish school, which needed repairs and funding, and which Damaris had been considering as a project for reasons that were partly charitable and partly strategic, because she understood that a duchess who invested in the parish was a duchess the county would defend. She was in conversation with Sir Gerald about the water table, which was their established territory, when the Duke appeared at Sir Gerald's shoulder and remained, and Sir Gerald eventually excused himself with the cheerful obliviousness of a man who did not register that he was being gently displaced, and then it was the two of them in the south corner of the Stoneford drawing room, and the conversation moved from the water table to the Ashvane timber rights, to a question he asked about her father's newest mill in Lancashire, which was the second time he had asked her a question about herself rather than the estate, and she was keeping count, and she was not going to pretend she was not. Sir Hadley Voss arrived at her left. She had been aware of him all evening. Sir Hadley was a baronet of 57 who had inherited his title at 22 and spent the subsequent 35 years confirming, to his complete satisfaction, that inheritance was the purest form of merit. He had been polite to her since April, in the way that a particular kind of man was polite to a woman he considered temporarily elevated, a courtesy that contained, at its center, the small, hard certainty that the elevation would not last. She had catalogued him. She had filed him in the same category as the men in her father's world, who smiled across boardroom tables and waited for her to prove she did not belong. "Your Grace," Sir Hadley said, addressing Damaris with the smile of a man selecting his moment. There were 5 people within comfortable hearing. He had positioned himself with the spatial awareness of a man who had been performing for rooms his entire life. "Ashvane is looking remarkably improved. One hears of extensive renovations." "The estate required attention," she said. "It is receiving it." "Indeed," he said. "Quite the transformation. Lease renegotiations, drainage works, tenant improvements." He paused with the practiced ease of a man who understood the architecture of a public remark. "One does wonder whether such, shall we say, energetic management reflects a long-term commitment to the county's traditions, or a more temporary enthusiasm." He smiled at the room. The room listened. "That is to say," he continued, "Wiltshire has a way of doing things, a rhythm. The county has survived rather well on the judgment of families who have understood that rhythm for generations. One hopes that new energy, however well-intentioned, does not mistake speed for wisdom." The word energy did the work he had designed it to do. In another mouth it was complimentary. In his, with his smile and his audience, and his 35 years of inherited certainty, it meant what he intended it to mean. You are a manufacturer's daughter, playing at being a duchess, and the county sees through it, and I am saying what the county is too polite to say. Damaris held his gaze. She had heard this register before, in Manchester and in London, and in every room where a woman with ability was expected to apologize for it. She was composing her response when she heard the Duke's voice. "The drainage redesign at Ashvane," the Duke said from her right, in a register she had not heard before. Not the library voice, not the Monday morning voice, not the dinner table voice. This was the one beneath all of them, the one that carried the full weight of a title that had been in his family for 200 years, and understood, precisely, what that weight could do when applied. The drainage redesign resolved a failure that had persisted for 3 seasons and was threatening the most productive holding on the estate. The lease renegotiations have increased the estate's annual revenue by 11% in 8 weeks. The tenant improvements have secured tenancies that were at risk of lapsing. He looked at Sir Hadley with the complete, undivided attention that Damaris recognized from the drawing room in January, the one that preceded a position he had already decided, except that in January it had been directed at her, and now it was directed at someone else entirely. And the difference was the difference between an interview and a correction. The Duchess's management of the Ashvane estate, he said, reflects precisely the kind of judgment the county benefits from. I should think we are all agreed on that. He held Sir Hadley's gaze for one moment longer than was socially necessary, which was, in the currency of a room that understood these measurements, the equivalent of a direct statement. Sir Hadley's smile underwent a rapid and ungraceful adjustment. "Of course," he said. "I merely wish to express my admiration for the Duchess's energy. Quite remarkable." "Quite," the Duke said, and the single word contained everything the longer speech had not needed to say, and Sir Hadley found someone else to admire on the far side of the room with the haste of a man who had misjudged the terrain and needed to regroup. Damaris stood beside the Duke in the aftermath. The 5 people within hearing redistributed their attention with the careful choreography of people who had witnessed something significant and were going to discuss it at length in their carriages home. She did not look at him. He did not look at her. The room continued around them, and the assembly proceeded, and nothing about his manner indicated that he had just done something that was going to cost her sleep for the better part of a week. She excused herself after 15 minutes, and found Lady Hathwick near the refreshment table, who looked at her expression, and then across the room at the Duke, and then back at her expression with the economy of a woman who required no narration. "Well," Lady Hathwick said. "He intervened," Damaris said. "I saw." "He did not need to. I was preparing my own response." "I am certain you were, and it would have been excellent, and it would not have done what his did." Lady Hathwick accepted a glass of wine with the unhurried grace of a woman settling into a conversation she had been anticipating for some time. "Your response would have established that you were capable. His response established that the Duke of Ashvane considers your judgment a standard the county should aspire to. Those are not the same thing." Damaris was quiet. "He made it about the estate," she said. "He made it about the facts," Lady Hathwick said. "He used the numbers. 11% revenue increase. 3 seasons of drainage failure resolved. He cited your work, not your character, so that Voss had no graceful way to make it personal, and so that the room understood his position without requiring a declaration." She paused. "That is a very specific kind of precision. It is not the precision of a man defending a household function." Damaris looked across the room. The Duke was back in conversation with the road commission men, and his posture and his manner were exactly what they had been before the intervention, and nothing about him suggested that the last 3 minutes had contained anything out of the ordinary, which was, she understood, precisely the point. "He has not spoken of me like that before," she said. "To anyone." "No," Lady Hathwick said. "He has not. It was about the estate." Lady Hathwick looked at her with the expression of a woman who had been told the same thing in slightly different language by a slightly different person 3 months earlier, and was experiencing a familiar patience. "The estate," she said, "is the language he uses when he does not yet have the other one. That does not mean the other one is not forming." She set down her glass. "He defended you, Damaris, not the accounts, not the drainage, you. And every person in this room understood it, including him." Damaris held her wineglass and looked across the room at the man who had told her a marriage was maintained, not felt, and who had just stood beside her in a public room and used the voice that carried 200 years of weight on her behalf, without being asked and without making it a performance. She looked at him across the room. He looked back, not the assessing attention. The other one. The one she had stopped pretending not to recognize. She held his gaze for 1 moment longer than the room required, and then turned back to Lady Hathwick and said something about the parish school repairs, and the evening continued, and the carriages were called, and neither of them said anything further, and it cost them both more than the county would ever know. He came to the library on a Thursday evening in the last week of May, which was not a Monday, and which was not about the accounts. Damaris was at the desk. She was reviewing the summer planting schedule with the focused attention she brought to everything at Ashvine, and she looked up when he entered, and knew immediately that the Thursday and the evening and the expression on his face meant something different from every other time he had walked into this room. He closed the door behind him. He stood inside the doorway for a moment, and she watched him gather something, not courage precisely, but the willingness to set down a weight he had been carrying for so long that the carrying had become indistinguishable from the standing. "I owe you an apology," he said. She set down the planting schedule. "In January," he said. "In the drawing room. What I said to you. The manner in which I said it." He paused. He was looking at the bookshelves rather than at her, which was the only indication that this was costing him something. "I told you that a marriage was maintained, not felt. I presented it as a principle. It was not a principle." "I know," she said. "It was a policy," he said, "built from a failure I could not afford to repeat. Venetia was." He stopped. He looked at the desk, at the ledgers and the planting schedule, and the evidence of 4 months of a woman rebuilding his world, while he stood inside his grief and called it reason. Venetia was everything I wanted, and nothing I could hold. And when she died, the distance between us was so complete that I did not know whether I was mourning my wife or mourning the fact that I had already lost her before she was gone. The room was very quiet. "I built a policy from that," he said. "I decided that what I needed was function, reliability, a marriage that could be managed, because it did not require anything that could be lost. And I walked into that drawing room in January, and I offered you a contract, and I believed I was being honest, and I wasn't honest. I was afraid." He looked at her. "You knew," he said. "I knew before you finished the sentence," she said. "You told me you wanted a marriage that was maintained, not felt," in a voice that was doing more feeling in that single sentence than any voice I had ever heard. "You were not describing what you wanted. You were describing what you could not survive wanting again." He was quiet. "That is why I accepted," she said. "Not because I agreed with your terms. I have never agreed with your terms. I accepted because a man who builds a wall that elaborate is a man who has something behind it worth the architecture, and I decided I was willing to find out what it was." She met his gaze. "I have been finding out for 4 months." He reached into his coat. She watched his hand and understood what was coming before she saw it, because she had been paying attention to this man and his coat and his pockets since Dorcas had brought her a gold band on a Tuesday morning in March, and she knew what he carried and where he carried it and what it cost him to carry it. He placed Venetia's ring on the desk between them, not beside a coffee cup. On the open surface of the desk, in the evening light, where it sat with the quiet weight of an object that had been held privately for 2 years and was now, for the first time, set down in the presence of another person. "You placed this beside my coffee," he said. "Yes." "You did not ask about it. You did not confront me. You did not make it a question." "No." "Why?" She looked at the ring on the desk. She looked at the man who had placed it there with the deliberate, ungoverned honesty of a man who had decided that the last wall was coming down and was not going to do it by halves, because a question would have required you to defend it, she said, and defending it would have meant choosing between the ring and me, and I was not going to make you choose before you were ready. The ring beside the coffee said what I needed it to say. I see this. I see you. I am not leaving because of it. and I am not asking you to put it down until you are ready to put it down yourself." He looked at her across the desk with the expression she had been watching build for 4 months, the one that had started as assessment and moved through recognition and respect, and something she had not named, because naming it felt like a claim she had not been invited to make. "I'm putting it down," he said. She stood. He came around the desk and stood before her, and they were very close in the library, with the May evening light coming through the tall windows and the ring on the desk, and 4 months of Monday mornings and drainage plans and a spring assembly and a door that was no longer locked or closed, but open. "Damaris," he said, and her name had the weight of everything he had not said since January, and everything the numbers had said for him, and everything the 4-second pause had contained. "Leander," she said. He kissed her. It was not tentative. It had the quality of a man who had spent 4 months revising his position and had arrived at a conclusion he was not interested in qualifying. She kissed him back with the precision and the commitment she brought to everything she had ever decided was worth doing, and the library was warm, and the planting schedule was still on the desk, and Venetia's ring was beside it, and neither of them required any further management. When they separated, she kept her hand on his arm. "The ring," she said. "Keep it," he said, "or don't. It is yours to decide. Everything in this house is yours to decide." I should have said that in January. I should have said a great many things in January. She looked at the ring on the desk. She picked it up and held it for a moment, the thin gold band that had been carried in a coat pocket against a man's body for 2 years. And then she opened the drawer of her desk, the one where she kept her most important documents, the restructured accounts and the drainage survey, and a small collection of notes in his handwriting that she had saved since February, and placed the ring inside and closed the drawer. "It is safe," she said, "and it is put down." He looked at the closed drawer. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth did the thing she had catalogued since March and was now permitted to acknowledge. "You are going to be very difficult to deserve," he said. "Yes," she said, "I am. I suggest you begin immediately." Her father came to Ashvaughan in June. He arrived on a Tuesday with the unhurried efficiency of a man who timed his journeys with the same precision he timed his business decisions, which was to say, he arrived when he had determined his arrival would be most useful, and not a day before. He spent the first morning with the estate. Damaris walked him through the South Meadow and the tenant improvements and the replanted North Field, and he listened with the particular attention of a man assessing not the land, but the person showing it to him. And he asked 3 questions, all of which were about the future rather than the present, which was his way of saying the present was satisfactory. They sat in the library in the afternoon. He looked at the desk, the ledgers, the survey maps, the planting schedule, the small drawer she did not open, and the room that had become unmistakably hers in every detail. "You are running this estate," he said. "I am running it with him," she said. "The distinction matters." "Does it?" "He cleared his Monday mornings," she said, "every week since April. The accounts do not require it. He sits in that chair, and we review the numbers, and we talk about the estate, and then we talk about other things. And he has never once told me how to manage a decision I have already made." She paused. "He reads the reports I prepare. He asks questions that confirm he has read them. He defers to my judgment on the financial matters and expects me to defer to his on the land management, and we argue about the overlap, and the arguments are productive." Her father was quiet for a moment. "Is he good enough for you?" he said. She thought about the question with the honesty it required. "He is becoming good enough," she said, which is the best version of the answer, because it means he is not pretending to be something he has already achieved. He is doing the work. Her father looked at her with the expression he wore when a long calculation resolved into a figure he had hoped for but had not assumed. "Your mother would have liked him," he said. "My mother would have terrified him." Your mother terrified everyone. It was her finest quality. He paused. She would have recognized in him what I recognize, which is a man who has decided to be honest about what he doesn't yet know how to do. That is rare. Do not waste it. The Duke found them in the library in the late afternoon. He entered with the slightly more formal version of himself that he maintained around people whose opinion mattered to him, and she noted that her father's opinion had become one of those. Her father stood and shook the Duke's hand with the firm brevity of a man who conducted all his transactions at the same speed. "Your Grace," her father said. "Mr. Corfield, I trust the estate meets your standards." Her father looked at him with the quality of a man who had built a fortune by reading people more accurately than they read themselves. "The estate is excellent," her father said. "My daughter made it so. My standards for the estate were met in April." He held the Duke's gaze. "My standards for the man who married her are a separate accounting and are assessed on a longer timeline." The Duke held his gaze in return. He did not flinch. He did not perform. "I understand," he said. "The assessment is fair." Her father looked at him for one moment more, and then nodded with the economy of a man who had received the answer he was looking for, which was not an assurance, but an acceptance. He left the following morning. His letter arrived 3 days later, addressed to Damaris, written in the direct hand she had been reading since she was old enough to read. It said, "He is not what I expected. He is better than what he was." Those are not the same thing. The second one matters more. Your father. She read it twice. She placed it in the drawer with the ring and the notes. The Duke's letter arrived the same afternoon, addressed to her father. She did not read it before it was sent, but her father's reply, which arrived the following week, said, "Your letter was the first honest thing a titled man has written to me in 40 years of correspondence. I consider the matter settled." Monsieur Corfield." She asked the Duke what he had written. He looked at her across the library desk with the expression that was entirely his own, and said, "I told him that his daughter had rebuilt my estate and my judgment in the same 4 months, and that I considered both improvements permanent, and that the accounts would speak for themselves." She looked at him. "That is not a letter about the estate," she said. "No," he said. "It is not." The midsummer dinner at Stoneford House was Lady Hathwick's design, though it bore the Matcham's name. 40 people, the full county, the arrangement of tables and guests executed with the strategic precision of a woman who understood that a dinner in June was a stage, and that the casting mattered. Damaris was seated at the Duke's right, which was where a Duchess belonged, and which was also, she understood, where Lady Hathwick had placed her because visibility was a form of declaration, and Lady Hathwick was making one. She wore a dress her father had sent from London in dark blue, well cut, the kind of thing that had stopped saying new money 3 months ago and now simply said, Ashvine. The Duke looked at her when she sat and said, "The blue," and she said, "I find it works," and the echo of a conversation they had not yet had, but which lived in the space between them, was a private thing in a public room, and she held it there with care. Sir Hadley Voss was present. He had been present at every occasion since May, with the careful attendance of a man who had been publicly corrected, and had decided that proximity to the correction was preferable to absence from the conversation. He approached them after the meal, in the drawing room, with the recalibrated grace of a man making the best of a position he had not chosen. He said the right things. He said them to the Duke first, which was protocol, and then to Damaris. And when he said them to Damaris, he met her eyes. and she met his with the composed directness that was her natural register, and that had not softened and was not going to. And everything that needed communicating between them was communicated in the quality of that exchange, and nothing further was required. The Duke beside her said nothing. He did not need to. His presence was the statement it had been since May, and the room understood it, and Sir Hadley understood it, and the evening proceeded with the smooth efficiency of a county that had made its assessment and was satisfied. She stood with Lady Hathwick afterward, near the garden doors, with the June evening warm and extended beyond them, and the Wiltshire countryside doing what it did in summer, which was to be so completely itself that pretension was impossible. "He is changed," Lady Hathwick said, watching the Duke across the room. "Not dramatically, not in the way people notice who are not paying attention, but in the way people notice who have known him since he was born and have been waiting for something to shift." Damaris watched him. He was talking to Sir Gerald about the summer road schedule, and his manner was what it always was, precise and controlled and entirely appropriate. But there was something underneath the control that had not been there in January, a quality of presence that was not performance, a lightness that lived in the space between his words rather than in the words themselves. "He is happy," she said. "He is. Are you?" Damaris thought about the question. She thought about it with the honesty she brought to all important calculations. "I am," she said. "I am also aware that I have spent 5 months being right about this man, and that being right is not the same as being finished. There are rooms in this marriage I have not entered yet, but the doors are open, and he is the one who opened them." She thought about something she had been turning over since the assembly in May. She had spent her life managing rooms alone, in her father's boardrooms, and in London, drawing rooms, and in every space where a woman with her background was expected to earn her presence twice before it was granted once. She had never needed someone beside her. She had built her competence specifically so that she would not. But competence and companionship were not the same axis. She had been treating them as though they were, and the wrongness had nearly cost her the ability to recognize what was being offered. He was not standing in front of her. He was standing beside her, and the difference was the difference between a shield and a wall, and she was done confusing the two. July brought the Wiltshire summer to its fullest expression, the long days and the warm evenings, and the particular quality of a county at the height of its calendar, when the gardens were in and the fields were productive, and the social machinery ran with the effortless precision of people who had been performing this season for generations, and found it, as they found all things, entirely satisfactory. The West Wing at Ashvaughan had been closed since the autumn of 1814. Damaris had noted it in her first week, and had not asked about it, because she had promised not to knock on walls, and the West Wing was the most substantial wall in the house. Mrs. Pembury had maintained it in the sealed, suspended state of rooms that belonged to someone who was not coming back, and the household had moved around it the way it moved around all of Venetia's absences, with the practiced avoidance of people who understood that some spaces were not theirs to reopen. The Duke opened it on a Wednesday morning in the second week of July. He did it without announcement. He told Mrs. Pembury, who told Dorcas, who told Damaris, and the chain of information had the quality of something significant being communicated through the channels the household had established for significant things. Damaris went to the West Wing that afternoon. The rooms were beautiful. Venetia had decorated them with the taste of a woman who understood beauty as a form of argument, and the argument was still there in the wallpaper, and the curtains, and the light that came through the west-facing windows with the warmth of rooms designed to hold it. The furniture was covered. The air was still. The absence was specific and total. She stood in the sitting room and looked at the covered furniture and the silence, and she did not change anything. She opened the windows to let the July air in, stood there while the room breathed for the first time in 2 years, then closed the windows and left, and said nothing about it to anyone. The Duke found her that evening. He came to the library, which had become his habit, and he stood in the doorway and looked at her, at the desk, with the expression that had nothing managed in it, and had not had anything managed in it for weeks. "You went to the West Wing," he said. "I opened the windows," she said. "The rooms needed air." "What did you think?" She looked at him. "I thought they were beautiful. I thought she had extraordinary taste, and I thought the rooms deserved to be lived in rather than preserved." He was quiet. "I am not going to change them," she said. "They are not mine to change, but they are not hers to keep closed either. She is gone, Leander. The rooms should not be." He came into the library and sat in the chair that had become his, the one across her desk, and he looked at her with the full, undefended attention she had earned over 5 months of drainage plans and account ledgers and a ring beside a coffee cup, and the patience to let a man put down his grief at his own pace. "The West Wing is yours," he said. "All of it. Furnish it, use it, open every room. I should have done this months ago. You were not ready months ago." "No, I was not." He held her gaze. "I am ready now, because you did not make me choose between remembering her and seeing you. You made it possible to do both, and I did not know that was possible until you placed a ring beside a cup of coffee and sat down and opened your correspondence as though you had done nothing extraordinary." She looked at him across the desk, where they had built something neither of them had planned for, one Monday morning at a time, one drainage survey at a time, one 4-second pause at a time. "It wasn't extraordinary," she said. "It was accurate. I saw what was true, and I did not pretend otherwise. That isn't extraordinary. That is just attention." "It is the most extraordinary thing anyone has done for me," he said. "And I am including in that accounting everything you have done to this estate, which is considerable." She looked at the drawer where the ring lived now, beside his notes, beside her father's letter, beside the small accumulation of evidence that a marriage arranged in January as a function had become, by July, something that neither of them had a sufficient word for, because the sufficient word was the one neither of them had said yet, and both of them knew was there. On a morning in the 3rd week of July, Damaris came to the breakfast room at her usual time and found, beside her coffee cup on the saucer's edge, precisely positioned in the way she had positioned Venetia's ring 5 months earlier, a gold band. New, the interior engraved with a date she recognized as the Monday in April when he had first said her name in the library, and 2 initials that were not Venetia's. She picked it up. She held it to the morning light. She read the engraving, and then she read it again, and the breakfast room was very still around her, in the way rooms become still when something true has arrived and is waiting to be received. He came in 4 minutes later. She did not look up, because looking up would have broken the symmetry of the thing, and the symmetry was the point. He sat down. He picked up his coffee. "Good morning," he said. His voice was exactly as it had been every morning for 5 months, controlled and courteous, except that this morning the control was a choice rather than a defense, and the courtesy was a warmth rather than a distance, and she could hear the difference because she had been paying attention since the first morning, and she had never stopped. "Good morning," she said. She put the ring on. It fit perfectly, because he had paid the kind of attention to her hands that she had paid to his grief, which was to say the complete kind, the kind that noticed everything and demanded nothing and waited for the right moment to act. She looked at him across the breakfast table. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything, because everything had already been said in the placement of the ring and the saucer and the morning light, and the 4 minutes that had echoed the 4 seconds, and the gesture that had been returned and transformed and completed. She thought about January and the drawing room and a man who had said a marriage was maintained, not felt. She thought about the ring on his saucer in March and the ring on hers in July, and the distance between those 2 mornings, which was not measured in months, but in the specific, irreplaceable work of 2 people who had decided to see each other clearly and had not stopped until the seeing was complete. She thought about her father, who had told her once that the best investments were the ones you understood better after you had made them than before. She understood this one completely. It had cost her everything she had planned to be, and it had returned to her everything she had not known she wanted, and the accounting was not close. It was not even the same currency. The coffee was drunk. The morning continued. The July light moved through the breakfast room at Ashvine Hall, and the south meadow was dry, and the accounts were balanced, and the west wing windows were open, and the county of Wiltshire went about its prosperous business, entirely indifferent to the question of whether any of it had been practical. The answer, which they had both arrived at independently and simultaneously, and from entirely different directions, was that it had been. Just not in the way either of them had told themselves in January. And that, Damaris had concluded, was the best kind of practical there was.